Hi, everyone. My name is Emily McCarty. Welcome to the Spark PPP second draw, as we affectionately call it 3P2D. For today's main event, we will have our Chief Technology Officer, Eric Mao, be presenting a demo today. So without further ado, I give you Mr. Mao.
All right, thanks, Emily. So just really quick, let's kind of talk through what I'm going to cover today. So there's quite a bit of content, and as I go through the deck, there's going to be some placeholders for where we're going to be looking for some feedback. A couple notes on this: we will provide you with this deck at the end, just because there's a lot of content on it. There's screenshots on it, and I'm sure you're going to want to refer to it after this webinar is over. In addition, we will be recording this and making it available. All right, so first we're going to talk about a new lead form. So we took a look at our original lead form. We made some changes to it to streamline it, to make it easier to use. The new lead form will support both new PPP borrowers as well as what we're referring to as non-Spark repeat borrowers. More about that later. We also have a streamlined application process for any of your existing Spark customers that received a PPP loan from you in the first round. We kind of have a dedicated experience for them to make it easier for them to apply for a second draw. I'm then going to talk about what the origination workflow looks like in round two. We've made some changes to some functionality in Spark to hopefully make it easier for you to not only get an overview of your pipeline, but also to manage both leads and packages in that pipeline. Then we're going to transition into kind of more of the lender-facing side, how you as a lender can work in Spark to manage the leads, the packages, and then really how that new loan origination workflow manifests itself within our platform. And then we'll kind of end the webinar with just some highlights on some of the key changes that are coming for first draws, as well as some of the new concepts that you'll be seeing for second draws. And we wouldn't be without any roadblocks if it wasn't for PPP. So we do have some roadblocks here that we just want to highlight to show you that we are still waiting for some information on some critical components of the PPP program. So, all right, let's jump in. First, we're going to talk about the improved lead form. And again, as I mentioned, we've got screenshots in here. I'll try not to spend a lot of time in the slides because you're going to see me working within these screens live as well. So really the highlights here, the key changes are we have some hard stops. So we're starting to ask some of the eligibility questions up front so that we can weed out ineligible applicants. So that'll create a hard stop condition within the lead form so that you can't submit the lead form to the lender. We've also have a simplified calculator. We've introduced some embedded FAQs. That's kind of what you see here on the right. So those are expandable, collapsible FAQs. We're going to be adding to that. We've improved our data capture of tax ID related fields, so social security numbers, EINs, as well as the concept of, as you're all aware of, with sole props that may have an SSN, some may have an EIN, will allow the applicant to designate what type of tax ID it is. It's no longer an input mask, it's no longer what we would call a password field. It's now an input mask, so they can actually visually see what they're typing. I think there were some data issues in the first round related to what applicants were typing in those lead forms. We've also improved the documentation of business ownership within the lead form. I know there was a couple scenarios that we had come in through our help desk where the person applying for the PPP loan also documented themselves as an owner twice. Hopefully in this new world, we will no longer have that scenario. And then finally, we've introduced a new field for an attestation. So if you want to have kind of a standard attestation with that standard checkbox and it disables the submit at the end, we have support for that as well. And really all of the things I'm talking about apply to more than just PPP. So if you're using our lead form today, improved data capture of SSNs, EINs, attestations, et cetera. So all of that will be available in your other products as well. So for existing PPP borrowers, so I don't know how many of you are expecting an existing PPP borrower that didn't originate with you the first time around. If you're anticipating applicants that fall into that category, the lead form will support that as well, because we want to classify that appropriately on our back end so that you as a lender can see anyone who's actually applying for a second draw. So it's a new path that we're going to support. Some of the key changes are the same as they were that I just reviewed. We still will have those hard stops. We have a different set of eligibility questions. In addition, we're going to ask some additional information about who the original lender was, how much they borrowed. We're going to prompt for NAICS code because we want to use that to calculate the eligible loan amount using the 3.5 if it's in Sector 72 or 2.5 if it isn't. So a lot of the same improvements I just talked about in the previous slide apply to existing borrowers as well. Just know that that's a path that people can take with this new lead form. Now, one thing I want to make sure everyone is clear is if you have existing Spark customers, they do not take this route. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. They will take a more first-class experience since they already have a login to Spark. So we're going to cover that in a little bit. So one of the things that we're recommending if you use our lead form in the second round is to put some verbiage within, probably above the lead form, or you could even customize our lead form if you want to, explaining that if you are an existing customer of our bank or lender, then someone will reach out to you with how you can apply for a second draw. We just don't want those applicants to go through this route, and your CSMs will be able to help you out with that as well. All right, so we talked about hard stops. So this is really just kind of surfacing kind of what that looks like. So again, key eligibility questions, depending on how I answer those eligibility questions, it's going to cause a hard stop. So we'll have an alert that's going to show up. In this case, it's this red alert that you see here. I can't continue. I wouldn't be able to submit it either. For second draw applicants, again, a slightly different set of eligibility questions, but again, the same concept. It's a hard stop. You can't apply. As I was mentioning, we have kind of more first-class fields for social security numbers. So kind of our standard input mask versus a password field. So that's going to be available as well. The data is all encrypted in our backend, so no need to worry about that. And in addition to that, we have this new field, which we're calling a kind of a tax ID field, where you can select that this is an EIN or an SSN. That just improves the quality of the data that's coming in. We talked about how we're improving business ownership. So this is really showing that we're moving the primary contact ownership is now going to be in the businesses tab. So that's where they'll be documenting their ownership percentage. And if they want to add additional owners, those will be available as well. We're not showing a big list of owners. We're making it a little bit more on demand, so the applicant can add additional owners as needed. And then finally, our attestation or the certification that's typically at the end. It's a scrollable field. It supports rich text. So you can, when I talk about rich text, it's bold, italics, different fonts, etc. Since these can be potentially rather lengthy, it is scrollable. And checking the box will enable the ability to submit the lead to the lender. So this is kind of our first feedback request that we have. We're kind of curious how many of you anticipate getting applicants who received a first draw from a different lender. So that's one of the areas that we're going to be interested in some feedback to see how much volume you may be expecting. All right, let's jump out into our demo. And again, this is the lead form that would be embedded within your website if you choose to take advantage of it. As I mentioned, there's really two paths. We have the path that I did receive a PPP loan in 2020. You notice that it changes what fields I need to respond to. So these are really three key eligibility questions. We're going to ask about the lender's name, how much they borrowed, the NAICS code, so that we can properly calculate a loan amount, and then finally the average monthly payroll. I talked about this FAQ on the right, so this is going to be kind of continuously updated as we get more information that's beneficial to applicants. It's kind of expandable and collapsible, and it allows the applicant to kind of browse through maybe some questions that they have. We talked about hard stops. So one of the hard stops I'll kind of cover out of the gate here is, were you in business on February 15th, 2020? If I say no, obviously that's going to be a hard stop. So it's kind of showing me that flag, you are not eligible for a PPP loan, I can't continue. And if I go to my last tab here, my submit button's disabled. The other path is the first time PPP borrower, and that would appear if I would answer no, so I didn't receive a PPP loan in 2020, a different set of eligibility questions, and then the ability to enter an average monthly payroll costs. And if you have questions about what that is, refer to our FAQs here on the right. The lead form is still split up into 3 primary tabs. Obviously, request details we just reviewed. Contact information has been simplified, as you can see. This is where we removed the ownership documentation from this tab and we've moved it into business information. Really, the key takeaway here is that we now have a kind of a first-class SSN field that has a mask applied to it. Moving into business information, really, I'll just kind of highlight the key changes. This tax ID field, so by default, it's going to be an EIN. But if someone is a sole prop, they could choose SSN and we'll format it accordingly. And then the kind of the simplified ownership, as you can see here, primary contact ownership, what's your ownership percentage, title, and years as owner. And if you have additional owners, we'll default to 1, but if you want to add more, simply click add additional owner and they can document as many owners as they'd like. Finally, we have our attestation. Again, this is just sample text. We'd expect you as a lender would have the appropriate attestation text that you'd want to include in your form. That's something you'd want to work with your CSMs. So as we prepare to look for a launch of this, start thinking about some of these changes and how it may impact you or things that you need to be ready for. So this would be an example of where we'd want to get your attestation and make it available within the lead form prior to a launch. And again, it's scrollable. And in order to submit, I have to actually check the box. All right, so I'm going to jump in just so you can see what this looks like as a lender who would be processing leads that are coming in. I'll go into this in a lot more detail as a little bit later on in this webinar, but I'm now logged in to the back end as a lender. One of the things I'll be covering later is this new packages listing. So this is a PPP-centric listing of leads and packages. So I know in the first round, we probably started with just homepage widgets, and then we quickly realized due to volume, we had to introduce this package listing. Well, we've kind of taken that and we're moving it into this Paycheck Protection Program section, which you should be all familiar with if you originated with us in the first round. But now we're making it so all of your PPP related packages are more easily accessible from this single launchpad area. So if you look at the views that I have, I can see my round 1 packages. I'll get into that later. I can see my submitted leads, my inactive leads, and everything is filtered to just the PPP product, as well as the PPP related lead forms that you may be using. So since we're really talking about lead forms, let's jump into our submitted leads view here. You can see this is going to look like any of the other leads view that we have. Again, it's just focused on PPP. And really what I wanted to call out is we will kind of surface if this is a second draw applicant or not. So you can just quickly, by glancing at your listing of leads, you can see how many second draw applicants you have. Batch conversion will still be supported as it was in the first round. So using my multiple selection here, my convert becomes available. You can also convert a single lead as well. But again, more on this in a little bit. All right, let's jump back to the deck and talk about repeat Spark borrowers. So these are borrowers that originated with you in the first round that are interested in applying for a second draw. So the way this is going to work, it's really using that new PPP-centric package listing that I just talked about. We have a round 1 packages view, as you can see from the screenshot here. We will support single invites, we'll support bulk invites as well. So really what that invite is going to do, it's going to notify the primary contact for that original PPP loan, letting them know that they can apply or opt out of a second draw. As with all notifications in Spark, it will be configurable. Here's just an example of our standard notification that would be sent out, just informing that borrower that they can apply for a second draw loan. So as a borrower, if I receive that notification, I can click on it. It'll take me right into my first round loan package portal. So that's really what you see here. We're looking at Smalltalk LLC. Sally's logged in. She's looking at her dashboard. She'll see an alert front and center that says you may be eligible for the Paycheck Protection Program second draw. Just talks about some of the eligibility criteria. And really there's two call to actions here. The first is you can apply now. The second is I'm not interested in applying for a PPP second draw. I'll talk a little bit about what we're going to do if they're not interested in applying, just so everyone's aware of the functionality that's going to happen behind the scenes. If a borrower chooses to take that route, what we will do is we're going to create a package at that point in time that's going to pull in the business information, individual information, all the documents, et cetera, and then just put it in a state of withdrawn. That withdrawn package will still be visible within your PPP-centric package listing. So there's a separate view where you can see inactive packages. It would show up in there, and you'd be able to see that borrower opted out. If that borrower came back to you and wanted to actually apply, you simply would go back into your inactive packages, and then you could restore it. And it's going to kind of be in a state where it's got the business information, the individual information, the owner information, all the authorized users, documents, et cetera, kind of ready to go. If you take the happy path, or I shouldn't say you, but if Sally was to take the happy path and she applies now, we'll take them to a separate screen where it's really a minimal application. It might look kind of similar to our lead form, but obviously since we know everything about this borrower and the individuals associated to it, we don't need that information anymore. We're going to confirm average monthly payroll. So that's going to come in from their prior PPP loan. We're also going to pull in their NAICS code, but we are going to require them to answer some of the eligibility questions that you are probably familiar with: 300 employees or less, the 25% reduction, as well as the requirement to use all of the funds that you originally received in the first round. Those are enforced. They will cause a hard stop depending on how this repeat borrower answers them. The calculator will work the same. It'll be based on the NAICS code. It's either going to be the 2.5 or the 3.5 with the max of 2 million. All right, so once you apply, once Sally applies, that will, very similar to the opt-out path, it will automatically create a new package, associate the correct processing method behind the scenes so we know it's a second draw. We'll append second draw to the package name. That package name obviously can be updated. We'll copy over the business information, the individuals, the ownership, all authorized users, as well as all documents from that first round. So if there were tax returns, financial statements, and the like, those will be all copied over. We'll also activate a second draw information request. We still have some work to do to really define what that is. You'll see in a little bit that that's an area where we're looking for some feedback, but that gets automatically provisioned and assigned to the user that just applied for this second draw. So as a lender, the only thing you had to do was notify them or invite them in and let them know that they're available. Everything else is going to be taken care of by Spark. Just more of an FYI, the original owner of that PPP package will get a notification informing them that this borrower, Smalltalk, applied for a second draw package. If you want a different person or a different email address to receive those notifications, that can be configured in the Spark backend with the help of a customer success manager if needed. So as I mentioned, this is a feedback request. Now, obviously, we're bringing in all the business information and the owner information from the original PPP loan. Right now, it's going to look and feel a lot like the information request we had in round one. We know that there's some changes coming in SBA Form 2483 SD for second draws. We haven't been given a final version of that form yet, so that will potentially change. But really, we're kind of interested is what kind of information do you want to make sure we're capturing in this second round draw? I'm curious if some of you don't care about the personal information because it's already been documented. I mean, that is a path. Now, obviously, you can configure this information request after our release to suit your specific needs. Just an FYI, you'll notice this little asterisk here, we are planning on simplifying use of funds in the first round. We kind of had our standard use of funds documentation where the borrower actually allocates an amount to each use. It's really not a requirement in the second round, especially with the new Sba Portal, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. That allocation really doesn't apply anymore, but we still think it is important to properly check the correct boxes for how that borrower chooses the funds, because that eventually will make its way onto 2483, and it also needs to be submitted to that Sba Portal. And the last thing we want to do is impact forgiveness. So, all right, let's jump into a quick demo of what that's going to look like for our repeat PPP borrowers. So I kind of mentioned that this all takes place from this PPP-centric package listing. So I'm already here. I'm going to change my view to my round one packages. I'm going to go to my filters and I'm going to search for Smalltalk, apply my filter, and I can see here's my Smalltalk LLC. I've obviously done this before, but it shows me that I've already notified Sally borrower. If I want to notify just this individual package, I can use my action menu and say invite. That's going to send that email off to Sally borrower. If I had multiple packages in this listing, I could check them all and then click invite as well, which is going to take a similar path. It's just going to send a notification to each round one package primary contact. So this is just a little notice that you're going to see after you fire off that notification. These packages won't immediately disappear. As you can see, that notification, depending on how many you've invited, those emails need to get sent, and that's when the notified on would get updated. They won't drop off this list until that borrower actually reapplies or opts out. So they're still going to show up until Sally borrower takes action. All right, now that we've sent that notification out, we're going to go and log in as Sally. I'm just going to bring in Sally's homepage. So Sally got the notification. She clicks on it, takes her right into her Smalltalk LLC, like you saw in the deck. There's an alert front and center with two call to actions: the apply now and the I'm not interested in applying for a PPP second draw. So I'm not going to take the opt-out path. We're just going to go ahead and apply now. And as I mentioned, we're going to pull the average monthly payroll from the original PPP package. We're also going to seed the NAICS code with the NAICS code from that primary business in the first round. We'll require that the applicant answer the appropriate eligibility questions, and then we're going to calculate an eligible loan amount. Again, if any of these are answered incorrectly, we'll let them know they're not eligible and you cannot submit. But I'm going to, again, take the happy path. We'll go ahead and submit that application. So now this is where a lot of that work is going on. It's creating a new package. It's associating the second draw processing method. It copied the businesses, all of the individuals, the ownerships, and all the authorized users. And then it provisioned an information request assigned me, Sally, the applicant, to complete certain parts of that information request. And that's why you see now we're on Sally's homepage of the second draw package with a number of tasks that she needs to complete. I'm not going to go through all these tasks. I'm assuming most of you are familiar with our information requests. I'm just going to start one of them and just show that, yeah, we brought in all of that key information from the original. So if there were changes, they could make changes from here. I'm just going to go ahead and save and complete this activity. And what I want to do now is I'm just going to jump back into that PPP package listing as a lender. We're going to leave the borrower view. Again, I don't think you want to see me go through that entire information request. And I'm just going to jump over here. And we're going to reapply this filter for small. You'll see that Smalltalk has now been dropped off. So it's still a round one package. I can find it in my standard package listing. We just drop it off this list. Instead, it's going to show up in the application stage. And there's my Small Talk LLC second draw, and I'm going to cover this in a little bit, but you can see we're surfacing some key information here. I can see the information request is currently in progress. And then within my actions menu, I have kind of a way that I can deep dive right into the package or go to that information request and start accepting workflows that have been submitted by the borrower. All right, so kind of moving on out of the demo back into the deck. Let's talk about this loan origination workflow, because we're starting to move from leads and repeat borrower applications into this new PPP-centric package listing. So it's probably quite a bit to see here, but for those of you who originated with us in the first round, the master stages that we have for our standard PPP product are application, review, closing, funding, and funded. Once a PPP package is funded, it moves into our forgiveness world. And since you're all actively doing forgiveness right now, I'm obviously not going to cover that. But what I really want to highlight is some of these key, sub-statuses or kind of sub-stages that exist, because this is really the model that we use to identify what we feel is beneficial to surface to lenders that are processing PPP applications. Within the application stage, the kind of the focal point is an information request. So we are surfacing the status of those information requests. So you'll see if it's in progress, if it's been completed, or if it's been accepted. Within the review master stage, we have a focal point on the SBA Form 2483, which is again that borrower application. And since Spark integrates with DocuSign, we know kind of some key status of that 2483. We know if it hasn't been signed. We know if it's been sent out and we're awaiting signature. We also know if it's been signed or not. Kind of moving on to another part of our review stage, we have the Sba Portal. That's kind of where, that's kind of the primary focus area. You'll be able to see if everything that's been submitted to the SBA. You'll also be able to see anything that has an Sba Review Complete. Now there's more, this may seem a little bit strange that we have two different stages. There's two different states for that. But as I kind of go through the rest of this deck, I'll highlight some of the changes that are coming based on the updates to, or really the new Sba Portal that is currently being developed by the SBA and will hopefully roll out sometime early next week. Our next kind of primary stage is closing, and then in closing, kind of the focus becomes the, really we're kind of boiling it down to an SBA Form 147, the note, but we know there's a closing packet, an envelope that typically gets sent out, which will contain that note, and we can track the status to know if it hasn't been signed, if it's awaiting signature, or once it has been signed. And then really our last two stages are not that interesting, funding and funded. So this is kind of the model that we use to define or to design this PPP-centric package listing. I don't know how many times I'm going to say PPP package. I'll mess it up like I almost did right there. All right, so let's move right into this package listing. And you saw a little bit already. Obviously, when I sent out that round one invite, I also used it to review some leads. But again, it's all PPP information. It kind of supports our standard capabilities of filtering, sorting, and paging. And we will have a number of bulk actions that I'm going to be covering as I go through the rest of this presentation. So we're going to start and go view by view so you can kind of get a feel for how this works. So round one packages, again, those are all completed round one packages. We'll support a batch invite for repeat borrowers. It supports the standard filters of a keyword and a lender. One area that we'd like some feedback on is how important is it for the repeat borrower widget to only be shown if that notification has been sent. So really what that means is, let's say I didn't invite Sally and Sally just happened to log in to her PPP package. We could always show that widget that she could apply. So that could always be visible. The other option is we hide it and it's only available when you invite. So that's kind of more of the model that we went with for forgiveness, for those of you using us for forgiveness. So that's a question we have. Interested in the feedback. Kind of moving on, Kind of our next chunk of views are all around leads. We'll show submitted PPP leads as well as inactive PPP leads. We'll support batch or single lead conversion, as well as kind of our standard filters, keyword or lender. Our next stage, which is kind of jumping into more of our origination workflow, is the application stage. So this stage really only has one primary view. It will support the ability to batch submit packages to the review stage. You can also use it to move a single package to the review stage, and it'll have our standard filters. I don't really go into some of these kind of item level actions or package level actions. So that's really this action menu you see here that's next to every package. One of the things we're trying to do when we can't do a lot of automation, one of the things that we know we can do is we can reduce the number of clicks that you have. So if you're working across multiple packages, you know that sometimes there's probably a lot of different clicks that you have to do to get to where you need to go. What we want to do is surface those destination pages within a package from this actions menu. So you'll see that as I jump into the demo. A feedback area that we're going to want to know, are there other actions that you see would be beneficial? So you could just jump to your package listing and then use the action menu to drive right into something. A perfect example is Sba Eligibility. You'll see that we're surfacing that when I get into one of my review views. All right, moving from the application stage into our next primary stage, that is review. You'll notice that this stage has a number of sub-statuses. So we've broken this out. Again, if you remember from that visual I showed, where there's kind of two primary deliverables. You've got a 2483 that needs to be signed, and then you have loan packages that need to be submitted to the SBA. So those views are separated. So it should be fairly obvious from the screenshot that I have here. So our first view is not signed. So those are all PPP packages that don't have a signed SBA form 2483. Now we're also going to surface if that form has been generated or not. We're considering making it available to just multi-select packages and generate them all with the click of a button. That's TBD right now, but that is the direction we want to go. At a minimum, there will be a single level action menu for you to drop this menu down, generate SBA form 2483, and at a minimum, you'll be able to do it at a package per package basis. In addition, you can see that we're showing Sba eligibility here as well. We felt that that was a beneficial piece of information that we should surface. So I can see here that the eligibility is currently in progress. If I use my action menu, there's going to be a way for me to dive right into that PPP package and work in the eligibility area. I'm not going to get into the details here. You can obviously read this later on, but we know that a lot of you want to have bulk request signatures. That is a candidate action that we want to make available. That there's some technical details that I obviously do not want to get into on this call, but that's our goal is to provide that, and if we can provide it, we will. It may not be available out of the gate if we figure out a technical way to do it, but if it's not available on day one, you will at least be able to more easily create an envelope through the action menu on an individual package basis. So this is kind of our next area of feedback that we'll be interested in, is especially when it relates to round one, when you got your 2483 signed, were there other documents that you included as part of that envelope that you sent out? And really, you know, that's one question, but then the other question is if there were multiple signers, Spark currently has this constraint where we only support one signer when working with DocuSign templates. In the future, we plan on correcting that, but obviously for PPP, since it's happening now, we will still only be able to support automating one signer. Moving to our next view. So I've sent out my 2483 for signature. We can look at that DocuSign envelope. We know when it's awaiting signature, and we'll be able to show you the packages with that status. There won't be any bulk actions available here because we're really waiting for the borrower to do something. Moving to our next view, we have signed. So these are all of the 2483s that have come back and have been signed. Really the next action for you as a lender is to send these to the SBA. And that will be supported as a single action as well as a bulk action as well. A key difference here is in the first round, everything went through E-Tran. In the second round, the SBA is building a new portal. So all loan packages are being initially submitted to this portal. This portal will have a way for you as a lender to log into as well. It's going to probably look and feel similar to the forgiveness portal. We haven't seen it yet, but we just know it's being built by the same group. So the nice thing is if you're using us for forgiveness, we already will have access to originate on your behalf. However, a key change is we're not going to get a loan number back right away. We're not going to get an authorization back right away. This is now we're going to send them the loan packages. They in turn are going to send those to E-Tran. And what we have to do is periodically we have to make requests out and get the status of it. So there's a chance if we send it that there could be failures. We'll have a view that will show you what the failures are. In addition, we'll send notifications to the submitter informing them that it failed origination with whatever reasons we can pull out from the response back. But if it was successful, it'll eventually move into that next view. Probably talk about that a little bit early, but this is really I submitted the loans to the SBA, and now I'm looking at my next view, and that is these are all of the loan packages that have been submitted to the SBA. No real action that can be taken on them from a bulk standpoint. If we jump down to our next view, which is Sba Review Complete, these are all of the PPP packages that actually originated. So we got a loan number and an authorization date back. Those will be automatically updated on the loan package. Forgive me, my screenshot probably doesn't demonstrate that, but this is really just a concept I'm showing. But that loan number would be populated as well as the authorization date. At this point in time, really the next action that the lender would do is submit over to closing, really our next stage. And as I mentioned, if there were errors that occurred, they will be available. You'll be able to see them in this SBA submission issues. That's a separate view. It's going to show you all the PPP packages that didn't originate, as well as showing what the issue was. You'll be able to correct and then resubmit from there. All right, so we're moving into closing, kind of one of our next major stages. And it's broken down into 3 different views. And the focal point here is getting the closing document signed. So in order for us to provide this, the assumption is you're leveraging our Sba Form 147. And we'll look at an envelope that has the Sba Form 147 to determine the status. So we'll know if it's not signed, if it hasn't been, it's not in a DocuSign envelope. We'll know it's waiting a signature when you send it out, and we'll know it's signed when it comes back and we have a signed document. We know you're going to want batch submissions for electronic signatures. We're still reviewing that. This one actually has an additional level of complexity because our Sba Form 147 does support multiple signers. And given our constraint of only supporting DocuSign templates with 1 signer, this one may not be available. At a minimum, you will at least be able to use the actions menu to more easily create an envelope for the given package. All right, and this is kind of similar to that original. We would like some more information about what you included in your closing packet or your closing DocuSign envelope. Kind of moving on to follow this process flow. Our next view is awaiting signature. Those are all of those closing packets that are out for signature. And then finally, we have signed. So once it comes back and we get the signed 147, and that's been attached to the correct placeholder, we know that it's now in a signed status. And really that next major action that the lender would take is to move it over to funding. And funding really isn't that interesting. So it's really just one view. You will be able to leverage this to do a batch submit to funded, or you can also do a single package submission to funded if you desire. And beyond funded, we'll have a view in here. It'll be a completed packages view. But if you're going to start doing anything with forgiveness, those would show up in the separate forgiveness listing that you're using today. All right, so that was a lot of views that I went through, but there is some feedback that we're interested in. We want to know if there's additional filters that would be helpful, what columns you think would be beneficial to see, what columns you don't care about. Are there any additional bulk actions that you think would be beneficial? And then how important is it for us to perform a data validation? So those of you who originated in round one and are familiar with Spark, you know, we do stage changes and we validate those stage changes. We plan on introducing PPP specific stage change validation. So I can't submit from application to review unless this criteria is met. I can't move from review to closing and if this other criteria isn't met. I know we've had feedback sometimes that can impede the process, but you know, validation's in there for a reason. If the data is not clean once you get to like a closing stage, you know, you're really just kicking a can down the road that you don't want to be at the receiving end of that. So that's why we do validation. So we want to know if we introduce those validations, is that going to impede your process? So, all right, so let's jump into a demo. Again, back in here as a lender, we're just going to kind of walk through these views so you can see the behavior. Obviously, there's a lot in that deck, so I don't need to cover this in detail. We've already talked about some of the concepts already. I'm just going to go ahead and clear my filter so I can see all of my PPP packages in the application stage. Again, really just the key concepts. At the action menu is where we want to surface, you know, kind of ways to just deep dive into a package. So right now I could view the information request by simply clicking that link. It's going to take me into the Smalltalk LLC second draw package, right into that information request. Eventually, my system probably just went to sleep. And there it is. So if I want to jump back to my package listing, you can see I just hit the back button and jump back. One change we're making, if you are using any of our package listings, we're going to remember the last view that you were on. So obviously we have a number of views here. So depending on the view that I'm on, when I leave this page, it's going to return me to the exact same view that I was at. So hopefully that's an improvement in user experience as well. Let's go ahead and send Smalltalk LLC to the review stage. So I could do that either as a single action here, or I can use it as a bulk action. This is where we would potentially validate if you want us to do the validation. It's dropped off this view, and if I move into my first review not signed view, I can see that Smalltalk LLC has now been moved into that. Eligibility is currently in progress. I see it's a second draw. Again, this is where we want feedback on the columns that are available. We're surfacing information on Form 2483 because, again, when we're talking about signing, that's kind of a key artifact here. From an action standpoint, we'll support generating the 2483, deep dive into the eligibility for SBA, the ability to submit to closing, as well as the ability to request signature. I know this is one of the things that we want to make available, but this is where it would exist. So ideally, I'd be able to check a number of these packages, request signature, automatically ships all that to DocuSign, and these would then move into an awaiting signature status. Moving from awaiting signature, we have our signed view, which would show me all of the signed 2483s with really that next action to submit them to the SBA. Apologies, I don't have enough information in this example environment, but this is where I would send it to the new Sba Portal. And if you look at my other views, these are all of the packages submitted to the SBA, everything that has been completed where the SBA has returned a loan number and an authorization date. If I was to jump into that, this is where I could actually move those packages into closing. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. I realize I didn't send this to the SBA, but it's just a demo. Let's go ahead and move this Smalltalk LLC over to closing. And it drops off the list. And if I jump to my closing not signed, it's going to show up in that list. So the rest of this hopefully makes sense. Again, we will provide you with the PowerPoint deck if you want to take a closer look at some of these views that we have. But really, it's the focus is to make it easier for you to see where these PPP packages are in the overall workflow. All right, let's jump back to the deck. Just have a couple additional slides I want to go through. The first is talking about first draw changes. So within the last week, we found that there were some new SBA forms that apply to the first draw, and really the forms are the same. They just changed the expiration date on it. So that's one change that will be coming. We'll update those forms so they have the correct expiration date. I've already talked about this, but all first draw loans will be sent to the Sba portal instead of E-Tran. Obviously, they'll make their way into E-Tran. But that is a change. There are also some additional legal structures that we're adding. There's a number of nonprofit related legal structures that'll be introduced into Spark. There's some new uses of funds that are going to be available. You can see them here. We're also retiring some of our uses of funds from the first round, refinance of idle, interest on debt incurred, and the group health benefits uses of funds. Those have been retired from E-Tran as well. And obviously a change that I've already talked about is a simplified use of funds designation. We still think it's important to document what they are, given that information's on the forms and makes its way into the SBA. So we're looking at a better way to capture that information in our information request, or to allow you as a lender to check the appropriate boxes if need be. As it relates to second draw, obviously these wouldn't be changes, but these are concepts that we want to make sure that people are aware of. Really, we'll be able to differentiate a first draw from a second draw by choosing a different processing method. We'll do that for you behind the scenes. Obviously, for repeat borrowers, there will be new forms coming, 2483 SD and 2484 SD. Based on we've seen a screenshot of them, there is a chance that these may be the forms that are used for both first and second round. Since we haven't seen them yet, we can't confirm that yet. Obviously, those forms will require us to make changes to the business history form. That's when we ask the PPP applicant a number of questions. Those come from the 2483. So we need that 2483 SD form in order to complete that business history form. We also know that in the new Sba portal, they're going to require us to send, for second draw loans, obviously, period 1 and period 2. And I believe that's going to be for the 25% reduction in revenue. One of the things that we're adding for second draw loans is there'll be a new placeholder so that we can prompt for evidence of the 25% reduction in revenue. There'll be a corresponding strategy. If you're a Spark geek like me, you might know what a strategy is. If not, ask Emily. And then finally, we've got our second draw Sba eligibility that we'll need to build in, and that'll be based on the 2484 SD that is hopefully coming soon. But more than likely, it's going to do some validations around max loan amount and the 300 employee eligibility rule. All right, so I've kind of introduced some of the roadblocks that we have in front of us as we've gone through this deck. But I just want to highlight them again here. Obviously, the main thing that we're looking for is to get those SBA forms complete. Those are very important for us to really finalize our final solution. The forgiveness form, for those of you doing forgiveness, obviously any of your loans that are 150K and less can take advantage of this new form. We don't have it yet. Once that is available, we will probably include that as a hot fix so you can take advantage of it. And then finally, since E-Tran is no longer being used, it's kind of a bummer for us because that means we now have a completely different environment that we need to integrate to. And we just found out about it yesterday. We've started working on our integration. I think things are moving well. We just need to get access so we can actually test our origination, which hopefully on a call later today, we will be given credentials to the new test environment for PPP originations. So I covered a lot on the call. I'm happy to stay on the line for questions. Seems like that's been going nuts since I started talking. So Emily, what are some of the big questions that we have?
Oh man, let's see. It's a little bit all over the place as far as questions go. And keep in mind, everyone, if we don't get to all of them today, which I don't think we'll be able to, we will follow up with you all individually.
I actually
One,
think that that's going to be best, Emily, that we respond via email because we have about 25 and we're not going to get to all of these. So we will respond to each question and we'll respond directly via email. And if there are any additional questions, you can contact Emily or myself. This is Tanner. But I just don't think we're going to get through 25 questions here in any kind of a reasonable, or certainly not in 10 minutes.
that is true. And yes, we did see the same Colson report that the portal plans to be open on the 11th. So fingers crossed on that one.
Yeah, for small CDFIs.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct.
All right, Emily,
so
Tanner, I don't have anything else to share. So,
and then the other item is that we'll be sending out a survey with those feedback requests that we had, so you can look for that later today as well.
yes, so thank you all for attending. Like we said, we will certainly follow up with all your questions and expect a lot of communication from us in the coming days for all of these expected changes. All right, thanks everyone.